Hey everybody, hello. I have launched this early morning live stream because I had an idea and I realized I forgot a financing approach that I put together in the effort to retain the A's in Oakland, the A's in Oakland, the Raiders in Oakland back in 2015, and part of it resulted in a sketch that I made of a stadium that people made fun of because it was kind of a napkin thing, but whatever. Um, that website that I developed is still alive, and the approach is still doable. And in looking back at what I heard at the City of Oakland's presentation to the County of Alameda on Tuesday, I realized that there were some fundamental basic approaches that went by the wayside in replacing, or not, I think unknowingly replacing them with something that's more complicated. Let me get to where this all started. And it is actually right here. This is the presentation, or at least part of it. This is by Molly Mayburn, the the woman who's the project manager. And this is what she was saying.
That law was attached to the letter to Ms. Marinishi yesterday, but happy to have an offline conversation to make sure that you have the exact references. I'm not a lawyer, so probably better to have you have that conversation with our city attorney's office to make sure that you're both speaking the same language, which is probably a language that I don't speak fluently. There are some bills in the current legislative cycle, which I think would bring the existing EIFT statute closer to the statute that Oakland passed in 2019.
I'm going to stop right there. What she's talking about regarding the statute is something called, and I've referred to it again and again and again, SB 293 Skinner. And SB 293 Skinner is a piece of legislation, actually a beautiful piece of legislation that was signed into law by California Governor Gavin Newsom on the 11th of October of 2019. And here is the bill text right here. I don't expect you to read all of that, but it is specifically worded, and I'll go up so you can see what I'm talking about. It is specifically designed for the A's Howard Terminal situation. In fact, it says the bill will establish alternative procedures for the formation of an infrastructure financing district by the City of Oakland under the provisions that were named, and it will require the City Council to initiate proceedings for the formation of the district by adoption of a resolution of intent to establish the district that, among other things, directs the preparation of infrastructure financing plan. And the bill required the infrastructure financing plan to include a provision for the division of taxes, will prohibit the division of taxes with respect to non-consenting affected taxing agencies, and that's the County of Alameda, okay? All of this should have been done in 2019 starting in 2019 and 2020 after the law was signed. But as clear by the meeting, there was zero progress, zero work done. And now there's an effort to basically jettison this, even though this law specifically deals with Howard Terminal. It was designed to, all you have to do is type Howard Terminal right there, and you will find a sentence that reads, the city may wish to establish an IFD at Howard Terminal or another location. This will spur private investment and provide additional dollars to support development and revitalization of urbanized areas that include housing for all income levels with equal access to public transit, goods, services, and economic opportunities. In order to adopt the provisions of Chapter 2.8, commencing with Section 53395 of Part 2 of Division 2, Title 5 of the Government Code relating to infrastructure financing districts to the unique circumstances within the city, a special act is necessary. This is that special act, okay? And it talks about the affected taxing agencies. It even mentions specifically that the ballpark must be considered privately financed. It's right here. It says public facilities means facilities authorized to be financed in whole or part by a district formed under this chapter. And it may be publicly owned or privately owned if they are available and to serve the general public, but shall not include any ballpark for the Oakland Athletics Major League Baseball franchise. In other words, you can't call that a public facility. And that gets to what I'm saying. You have to call it a private facility. Think about that, okay? Now, let me go back to what was presented to continue to make my point presented by Ms. Mayburn to continue to make my point. And here, okay? And she says, this is what she says. She says, there.
We could use the EIFT structure, whether or not those bills pass. So I wouldn't describe it as dependent.
Now here's what's wrong with this, okay? This happened on Tuesday of this week. This is Saturday. The work she's talking about doing, they're a year behind. The A's are talking about leaving. And the question is that the county board of supervisors never asked is how do they get to a point where they never established what they should have done first, the public financing authority, the agency that's called for in SB 293 Skinner. You would say, wait a minute, then you didn't show us that. Yeah, it's actually there though. Don't mean to snow you at all. It is listed specifically as the, I'll tell you exactly where it is as I type find in page agency. Yeah, it says that let's keep going here. Agency, and agency. Let's see, highlight all. Go here, match case. Yeah. In addition to the findings, this is section 2, section 53395.82, subdivision B, which reads, in addition to the findings and declarations in section 53395, the legislature further finds and declares that consolidating in a single agency the ability to capture property tax increment revenues to finance qualified public facilities in the city of Oakland will provide community-wide benefits. Okay, so they call for you to do that. But here's where the city went wrong, folks. Where the city went wrong was they didn't establish the agency first and then marshal the staff to draw the boundaries to determine what the tax increment levels would be, to determine county gain and loss. In other words, gain in terms of development that's anticipated and lost by using part of their revenue from Howard Terminal for the tax increment. And they didn't basically start with that organizational focus. Instead, they did the process bass-ackward. They focused on getting approvals for the athletics. They focused on community outreach with respect to the design stuff, okay? The stuff that people talk about publicly. But they didn't stop to think about the financial and organizational approach beyond SB 293 Skinner. And so now they are being led down a primrose path by some consultants or lawyers. They haven't told us what the person's exactly said. and they're going into an area that they don't need to go into that involves not having the County of Alameda involved. They could simply say, hey, look, we have SB 293 Skinner on the books. We should adjust it. The real question that has not been asked by anybody of the city of to the city of Oakland is, why is it necessary specifically to jettison SB 293 Skinner in detail? Explain to us. Do the A's not want to pay a property tax? Do the A's not want to be mentioned? Because the A's must be mentioned. Why? Because, let me go forward and paint the picture for you to explain why they must be considered. And then I'll go back for that. I'll go back to presentation here.
But at a high level, the EIFD is structured in this way. So the EIFD requires creation of a public financing authority in cases where there's only one taxing entity that participates. Then the legislative body of the public financing authority is simply the legislative body of that taxing entity. So if it were only the city.
See, this is where she's actually wrong, because what happened was in SB 293 Skinner, it called for the affected tax agencies to sit on the board of the agency. But see, she doesn't know that. She admits she's not a lawyer. So look, I grant her that. She's not a lawyer. She admits it. But she was tasked with presenting the city's case. And what she said in that vein was not right. Let me continue and go forward here. And by the way, the reason you always see two me is because that's from my broadcast Tuesday, and I was presenting that, and at the side, then at the same time had my little window open there, but I digress. Okay. Let me go back here in a moment and allow you to take a look at what she's saying here. Right there, and then I'll go back here, and then we'll play this. Yeah.
Would be the city council. If the county opted in, the board, the Public Financing Authority board, would consist of representatives from the city council, the county board of supervisors, and 2 public members pursuant to the law.
Right, and that's why this should have been done a year ago. Okay.
The primary role really of the Public Financing Authority is to direct preparation of and eventually approve the infrastructure financing plan, which is where you get into reams and reams of paper and lots of.
And see, at this point, she got into a discussion regarding the district and the community facilities district as well. They say sometimes known as a Mello Roos district. Property owners within the district agree to impose a special tax on the property, and those taxes are used to help pay for construction or maintenance of public facilities. And that's not always true. And you can use, in fact, this is where the problem is, okay? SB 293 Skinner actually allows for, and specific allows for, to pay for the construction of public facilities, and it doesn't necessarily allow for the maintenance of them directly, but there is a way to get around that. And the way to get around that is simply by, in determining the development costs for the project, you simply add in an additional labor cost, which can be used for maintenance for an anticipated period. Okay. And then on top of that, you have a corporation which can then, if you can establish an LLC for services, and that LLC can simply ask for a grant for from the Public Finance Authority. There's no rule against that, for such things as anticipated future construction or anticipated future need, whatever that is. What it does with that anticipated future need is, what it does. but there's no prohibition against, there's no way around that problem. There is a way around that problem, which would identify, which would call for establishing another type of corporation to give those funds to, if one were so inclined. Or, well, there are whole other ways, but I'm saying that they're calling for a community facilities district. The community facilities district can also get itself the money from a borrowing from the increment revenue. There's no prohibition for it. And let me say something else too that I think has to be noted here. We have a gigantic history in the city of Oakland of the redevelopment agency borrowing money from the city and then also using its tax increment financing money for services. In fact, Henry Gardner told me, we had a conversation about this years ago, that we used our TIF money to remove crack houses in East Oakland. All right. So there is a precedent for this use. It's not going to get anyone thrown in the hooscow. And so there doesn't have to be this complicated defensive posture with respect to monetary flows, just so because someone believes they're going to be thrown in jail or something like that. That's absolutely ridiculous. So, and then not only that, if you think that problem exists and you want to have the law adjusted, guess what? Adjust the law. But this way is not the right way, primarily because the other question is, are the A's going to pay property taxes for the facility? And I say that because Dave Cavall always talks about paying project generated revenues. Okay. Project generated revenues. He never just says we're going to pay the property tax. The property taxes, as you can see in SB 293 Skinner, is what is collected by the agency. Is the real reason why they're running away from SB 293 Skinner because the A's, for some particular reason, want a kind of a property tax abatement on a 1% rate? That has to be asked. These are the thorny questions that have to be asked, primarily because the city farted around and wasted all this time doing it. Now, one can blame the pandemic, but look, they had community meetings during the pandemic via Zoom. There was a lot of work that was done via Zoom that can still be done via Zoom or StreamYard or whatever. I'm using StreamYard. Point is, there's got to be some excuse why they didn't do it the way that they did in terms of immediately igniting SB 293 Skinner, especially when you consider that the city council ratified the law in November 2019. So this Oakland City Council ratified the law, and then what happened? The city staff just sat on it? That's what it looks like, okay? That's what it looks like. So let me show you my other issue with respect to Mello Roos and Mello Roos, the application of Mello Roos in this instance. And to show you that, I went to a new version of my nifty spreadsheet here regarding on Howard Terminal. And what I did was I built in a new area, which I will highlight. And as you can see, if I move it over here a bit, okay, I'm going to see if I can highlight all of this, and you can't. This is the new Mello Roos section, folks. All right. What do you think? All right. If you say it looks complicated, I would say you're right. I get you. Okay. But let me explain. Mello Roos taxes can be done in any number of ways. And the way they worded that, Mello Roos is used, let's say, in the case of business improvement districts in Oakland, those were Mello Roos examples that we've done for decades. And the idea in those cases was to raise money to pay for security. Okay. So that wording in the city's presentation regarding what Mello Roos money is used for is not correct. What it is basically is the city says, hey, you know what? hey, property owners, you guys get together and you vote on a special tax on yourselves to pay for these, security guard types, right? And they vote and they say, sure, we'll pay X amount annually based on per square foot or some number that they agree to. All right, that's the idea. In this instance, they're trying to get around what I contend is an incorrect legal interpretation. That, and not only that, if they believe the SB 293 Skinner didn't cover it, the question remains: why not just simply add a line appropriately to ratify it, rather than all of this, maneuvering? Are they trying to actually maneuver to give financing to some organization that they're already familiar with? There is that component. Are consultants steering the city to some finance organization that maybe they can get a cut of a deal? These are the questions that you really have to be aware of what's happening to ask, okay? And not get snowed by this stuff, all right? So point that I make. So anyway, in this instance, what I showed, let me see if I can enlarge this, is a scenario where a $30 per square foot Mello Roos rate is charged. And I'm thinking that the other reason to do this is to raise enough money, all right, to match the taxing agency money that they would lose if they went ahead and just didn't. You see how this is? Okay, it's actually bigger than the amount that they would lose over here in this base tax year revenue. All right, this is the TIF revenue. See, it's zero, and then it goes to at 4% rate of growth of assessed value, $840,000, and then 1.75 million. Well, it's really hard to let a significantly sized bond issue with that. But if you use this, if you combine it, if you go back to the county AC Transit School District and hey, say, you know what, we're going to use this chunk that you would normally get from Howard Terminal, but we're going to cut a deal with you and make sure that we'll build no school facilities and libraries and the like for you through our plan. All of that process should have been started a year ago. It wasn't. All right. And so the question remains, how much is Mello Roos going to be? If it's $30 per square foot in my test, that would yield, if you use the ballpark at 784,000 square feet roughly, that's $23 million, which is just north of what you would be losing by not being able to capture the base year taxing agency revenues, all right, that they normally pay, okay? But here's the other problem. Beyond, the VAs want to pay that on the ballpark if they're trying to escape a property tax. And you see where we have over here, if I move this over here, we have this set at zero, okay, right here beyond the ballpark. Now, the only place that changes is if we have some notice that the A's are going to, add 1 million. That's 10 million. Excuse me, that's a bit too much. But let's say 1 million. 1 million. There we go at 10 million. Okay. Boom. 1 million square feet of additional new development. All right. In 4 years later. Okay. So that gives us a Mello Roos payment for that year of 1,784,000. Excuse me, we'll use square feet. I'm sorry, of total of 1.784 million, which leads us to a new assessed value from construction of 600 million, and then a $53 million Mello Roos tax payment for that year. Okay, and so, which actually should be, if you're going to add that square footage, it then has to be each year after that. So it's just not that 1 year. Okay, I'll adjust that. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just simply say, since that is added to that, well, I'll just adjust that formula, which I'll do later, because that should be 1.784 million all the way down, unless you add something else here, which causes this to increase and so on. All right. So, so it's a big issue, but which highly fixable. All right. But my point is, and encapsulated in this example is the volatility and the unpredictability of development. Why? Because we don't know when the A's are going to announce any other developer building anything there. They have no developer partner other than themselves. They're the master developer. And so we don't know what the future stream of development is really going to look like with certainty. And that's a big issue. And so you're asking us to design a bond issue for Mello Roos, okay, based on a revenue stream that's iffy? Ooh. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. So that's what leads me to discussing what are called private activity bonds. And a private activity bond is simply I'll go with here's, you can read about it here. There's another explanation, but I'm going to basically save you from reading, and I'm just going to talk with you. Okay. A private activity bond is a bond that, and I want you to keep this in mind. Okay. And then I'll come back to that in a second. All right. A private activity bond is that more than 10% of the proceeds from that are going to be used for a private development. The A's will own the land at Howard Terminal. They're building a privately financed stadium. That's all and the infrastructure cost, boom, at $455 million right there opens up private activity bond land. Okay. What does that mean? It means that while the city, through its public financing agency, can let the bond, it's not responsible for paying for the bond should it default. The A's are. Okay. So it's a very simple, elegant version of what Molly was trying to explain the other day, which is completely different. Private activity bonds are very common around the country. All right. Not just in California. So this is the way that I suggest. In fact, I originally pushed this, and I believe that the African American Sports Entertainment Group should use this model. Okay. My Coliseum reboot contained my plan. Remember that this is that little drawing that people made fun of. All right. There. Okay. It contained the financials at a glance here, where I was discussing the financials, okay? And I said that the project will be financed by an industrial development lease revenue series of bond issues led by the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum Joint Powers Authority, but on behalf of a specially formed corporation, an LLC. There'll be a partnership of the City of Oakland, the A's, and the Raiders, and a hotel corporation. That's a private company, okay? And the City of Oakland elected to buy out the county, then the JPA name will be called the Oakland Coliseum JPA. And I said, because the use of an industrial development lease revenue series of bond issues, the city and the county would not have to pay for defaults. The Raiders, a city hotel company, owns the project, but title is signed over to the JPA issuing the bonds. The JPA bonds are secured by a first mortgage on the project and property. And the Raiders, a city hotel company, then makes lease payments to a bond trustee using revenue from the Coliseum City project in this case, okay? And that acts as a third party and uses the money to pay off the JPA bonds. The bond trustee is commonly, okay? And so if the bond's going to default, the bond trustee forecloses on the project and sells it off to repay the bondholders without damaging or affecting the JPA as the issuer. Okay. Note that neither the City of Oakland or the County of Alameda or any other government entity would be affected, no public subsidy or loan is required here. Okay, and so in this instance, if we were talking about using a redevelopment area in this, all right, in this example, then the redevelopment agency would simply pay the Raiders A City Hotel Company, which would then pay for the retirement of the bonds. See how that works? So, and so basically they're paying for what? They're paying a private activity. You see what I'm getting at? They're paying a private organization. Sure, it has government involvement, but it's a private organization for a private entity that owns a private building, right? That's it. There's no shame in this game, folks. Okay, this is done many times, and we can do it. We can do it for the A's project as well, and it's a much simpler, more elegant approach than what the city is contemplating right now. And so there you are. If you have any questions, I hope you know where to find me. I'm at Zenny at Zenny62media.net. Okay. Right there. Okay. Or if you want to text me, I'm at 510-517-7565 here. Okay. And there you are. And good Saturday to you, folks. It's 7:48 in the morning on the East. Subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com. That ends this broadcast.